Have to do that for recruiting purposes so we don't break any rules. And now I'm gonna see if I can get Bill Lester in here. I still don't see him. We'll get it right. We got a little time tonight. Just chilling. There he is, my man. Alrighty. We get Bill Lester in here. This is gonna be exciting.
Finally,
there, there he is. What's up?
hey Mel,
How you
man,
doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself? I'm sorry, man. Technical glitch.
Hey, it's all good. I'm just hanging out over here, man. I've been looking forward to this. I'm glad you could get on with me, and welcome to Tucker Talks, man.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, how you doing? How's the family?
Everybody's safe. Everybody's doing well. If you hear rumbling in the background, it's not my stomach. It's the weather outside. We got thunderstorms here in
Oh, do
Georgia,
you?
so yeah. But
Yeah,
everybody's good here at the house.
that's great, man. That's great. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. Um, I wanted to start by just trying to go back to when you first kind of got hooked on racing. I read where you grew up in the Bay Area and you were taken to a race, and at some point you just felt like you knew that's what you wanted to do. Can you take us back to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just shy of 8 years old, and I had an obsession with cars as a kid. My parents told me I never went anywhere without a Matchbox or a Hot Wheels in my hand. So just loved cars, and loved
Yeah,
speed. Anything that was fast, I loved doing, roller coasters or, just whatever
yeah,
involved speed and excitement and adrenaline. I was all about it.
yeah,
And so my father knew about my love of cars, and he thought, be pretty cool to take me out
yeah.
there and take me to a real race. And so that's exactly what he did. He found out from a friend of his that there was a race up in Monterey, Laguna Seca, not too far from
Oh,
where we were living in San Jose. And so
yeah.
he took me to a race there. And I mean, these cars were blowing by at 160, 170 miles an hour. And I mean, I was just infatuated. I was intoxicated. I was blown away. I just never saw anything like that. I mean, it's one thing to see cars running on the street, and it's another thing to
Yeah,
see, be on the freeway at whatever,
yeah,
60, 70 miles an hour. But to have these cars with all that sound, all that speed, all those smells, from oil and gas and brakes and all that,
mm,
it was intoxicating to me. And so when I saw that, I was like, you know what? I would love to be able to do that, but I didn't know if it was real. It was a real dream. It was a real possibility because
yeah.
nobody who looked like me was there at the track. It was my father and
Right,
I, and
right,
everybody else was, them, right? And so
right.
when I was so young, I wasn't really tripping off of that. I just knew that,
Yeah.
I got basically caught by the hook. I was hooked right then. So
Mm.
fast forward a few years, got my driver's license, and it was game on. It was fast and furious before it was a movie. I mean, I was doing all
Yeah.
sorts of things illegally that I don't condone, right? But
Right,
I just had
right,
to
right. Of
scratch that itch.
course.
I just loved cars. I loved going fast and
Yeah.
did all kinds of crazy things. Got my first car when I was 18, fixed it all up, and then started really doing some serious street racing. Because before that, I was goofing around with my parents' car. But when I got my own car, I was modifying it, aftermarket
Wow.
shocks and springs and sway bars and high performance tires and lowering it. I put a roll bar in it. I mean, fire extinguisher. I was serious, man. I was serious for my street car, right? And I
Yeah.
was up in the skyline hills of Oakland because our family moved from San Jose to Oakland by then.
Okay.
And I was just terrorizing, Skyline Drive, Skyline Boulevard, which is, it's kind of like the equivalent of like Mulholland Drive in LA,
Mm,
right?
mm.
Which is a very, very, dangerous, undulating turns, twists, and kind of, track that or street that if you go off, there's going to be some some very serious
This is gonna be a
consequences.
problem.
And yeah, absolutely. So I started getting a reputation as being pretty good up there. And then somebody said,
Mm,
listen, before you kill yourself or somebody else, take it to a racetrack. And I'm like, okay, well,
wow.
how you get to a racetrack, right? you got to have a car to get there, and you got to have money if you got to have a car to get to a racetrack, because
Mm,
my street car wasn't going to be something that was adequate for a racetrack.
mm,
I had to buy
mm-hmm.
a real race car, one that was not legal for the streets, gutted
Sure.
interior, and just everything set up for racing, no creature comforts, that sort of thing. And so I was like, okay, so how do you buy a race car? Well, you obviously got to be able to afford it. So that's what took me on my journey of getting an engineering degree from Cal Berkeley. I have an electrical
That,
engineering, computer science degree from Cal.
you
And
know,
I
when I
did
read
that.
when I read that, Bill, when I read that, I was surprised because is that the normal route that drivers take?
No, Mel, that's not how it usually works. Usually what happens is these kids are given a go-kart or a quarter midget or some sort of, mini racing vehicle
Mm,
in their single-digit years, right? So if you're 6 or 7, 8 years old, you go out there and you got a go-kart, that sort of thing. And so that was not the environment I was brought up in. My parents thought,
sure.
racing, it's
Right.
great that we exposed you to it, but we're not supporting that. You're going to have to find your own ways and means to be able to support that kind of racing fetish, or
Wow.
habit. So, that's what the engineering degree was for, because I wanted to just find out what the quickest occupation I could get to and make good money in was. And, typically you think of doctor, lawyer, something like that takes, postgraduate work or,
Yeah.
internship and that sort of thing. And I knew that, if I got my butt kicked for 4 years at Cal, I could come out there and go straight into, the high tech sector, because it was kind of like
Sure.
the boom of Silicon Valley. And so
Mm,
since I was right there in Northern California, and the valley was right around the corner, that's
sure.
exactly what I did. I got that 4-year degree. I went to work for Hewlett Packard Company, and effectively with that first paycheck, I bought a real race car. So I'm 22 years of age. I'm not 8 years old, running around in a car, in a race car, going through
Wow.
my teens racing. I'm 22, so I'm already old, right? So, but I found out I loved it. My first year, I was Northern California Rookie of the Year. And then
Wow.
the next year, I was Northern California Road Racing Champ for my class. And I thought immediately the doors of corporate America and race teams, were going to be opening, and that, I'd be going straight from tech to professional racing. And nothing could be further from the truth. I wound up having a 15-year career in the high-tech industry before I left to really pursue my passion and my love, which was racing. So you're probably
Wow.
wondering how I was able to do that, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. So you were working for HP or in tech and
Yeah,
racing at the
on the
same time,
weekend.
but on the
On the
weekends.
weekends. I was living for the weekends, basically glorified, road warrior, trying to get out there and do what I really love to do. Even though I was good at engineering, I just didn't love it, right? It's not what I wanted
Mm,
to do with my life. I felt I was given a gift, and it was
yeah.
up to me to realize it and to see it
Mm,
through. And so while I worked, the 8 to 5 and being successful by everybody else's definition but my own, I just wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't happy. And that's how I define success. It's not how much money you make, it's just how fulfilled you are, how happy you are.
that's
And
great.
so I left that to pursue going racing full time. I got married
Wow.
in 94, and with my wife's blessing and support, she said, listen, one, you're not getting any younger, and two, you're not getting any easier to live with, not doing what you want to do. Go and try to put all your attention and your time and effort into it to see if you can make that dream a reality. And that's what we decided to do. I took a leave of absence initially from HP to
Mm,
pursue racing, and the door started opening up, and I started gaining some traction and what have you. And so after 6 months, I told HP, thanks for the memories. I'm going to, continue to pursue this. And I consider that those 3 years that we set aside, I was gainfully unemployed. What I mean by that
wow.
is I wasn't getting a paycheck, but I was happy with the pursuit of trying to become a professional race car driver. Something that, by all accounts, I shouldn't have been able to do, because, here I am at 37 years of age, leaving something that I was quote unquote successful at to do something where I didn't know if I was going to make it. I mean, I took a bold leap of faith. I just jumped in with both feet. And
Wow.
sure enough, I became a full-time professional race car driver in NASCAR in 2002. And so, I mean, I had a good career in NASCAR. I enjoyed it, but looking back on it all, I wouldn't have changed a thing.
Man, that is fascinating. Was there any carryover from your 8 to 5 tech job into the NASCAR business? Was there
Well,
anything that you could take from that or
the only thing I could really take from it is that when I came into NASCAR, it was kind of like the advent of technology into the NASCAR arena. And what I
Mm,
mean by that is that traditionally, the crew chief who makes, all the adjustments, who tells the crew to make all the adjustments to the vehicle, he just goes by what the driver says, right? So technology had not entered NASCAR until the early 2000s, right when I came on the scene. And at that time, telemetry and instrumentation and all those sorts of things were being utilized on the car. So they would put sensors on the car,
mm-hmm,
and the data gathering was taking place. And then
mm,
the engineer would analyze all that data. And then the crew chief would make the changes based on what the engineer said really needs to happen, along with the feedback and input of the driver. You don't take the driver completely out of the equation, but
sure.
the data is repeatable, right? The driver can say one thing and the car could be doing a completely different thing, right? So who's the crew chief
Yeah,
going to believe? But
right.
if the crew chief sees the real data in terms of like how far the car is traveling, or how much it's leaning over in the turns, or how fast you're getting on the accelerator, or how hard you're getting on the brake, that the data doesn't lie. And so it's a
Yeah.
proof positive to the crew chief that this is what we need to do to make you faster. And I embraced that. I was like working right alongside with the engineers, affecting those changes, talking to the engineer about, yeah, I see that data showing this, and that's exactly what I feel in the car and that sort of thing. And so I loved it. A lot of drivers at that time early on were just, they couldn't understand it. They were intimidated by the technology. They were used to
Sure.
doing things the old fashioned way.
Yep.
They were
Yep.
used to
Yep.
saying, well, I need a round of wedge and or I need a, 50-pound heavier spring, or I need a half-pound less air pressure. And that's what the crew
Mm,
chief would react to.
sure.
In my instance, in my case, yeah, I was telling them what the vehicle was doing, in the corner. It was maybe loose
Yeah.
on entry, which means the back end wants to, pass the front end, or it was tight on exit, which means you can turn the wheel as much as you want and the car still wants to go straight. But the
Mm,
fact is that I embraced the technology, and that was something that I was comfortable with completely because all those years at HP. I mean, we were basically working on technology every day. So when I saw
sure.
computers and stuff entering the fray, I was like, I'm happy.
Wow, man, that's incredible. It kind of sounds like what's going on in sports and football with analytics and
Mhm.
the analytics department and listening to the data, and making decisions. Are you going to go for it on fourth down or things like that based upon the numbers? And there's old school, and then there's the analytics guys, and there's usually a little bit of a rub. But it seems like you didn't have that issue. You embraced it, and it probably gave you an advantage, wouldn't you say?
I would definitely say so. I mean, like you were saying, there weren't many drivers coming out of engineering school getting into racing. On the circuit right
Well,
now, there's only one other driver with an engineering degree who actually, I guess, really went through college, and that was Ryan Newman. And
oh,
he came
okay.
out of Purdue with a mechanical engineering degree, and I'm sure
Mm,
that helped him with regard to his progress and
yeah.
ability to, be successful. But a lot of these guys that came up as drivers, they came up turning a wrench in, their father's garage or in some shop or something like that. And
Yeah.
next thing you know, they're, trying to apply themselves as a driver and not really, learning the new stuff. They learned it the
Mm,
way their father did it, or, their
yeah.
uncle did it, or, whatever the case is. They weren't
Sure.
looking at computer screens. Now,
Right.
as it is right now, all these drivers are using technology, of course, and they're
Yeah.
using simulations. There is a
Hmm.
program called iRacing, which is
Hmm.
what you utilize at home to get used to the rhythm of a track and how the track flows and where the corners are and how hard you can go into these corners. And the approximation to the real thing is unbelievable. It can't obviously mimic really the G forces, even though
Yeah.
some of these simulators have, full motion with the seat and all that stuff with shock absorbers, but it's still not the same thing, but it's
Yeah.
darn close. And it gives
Wow.
you a decided advantage once you get to the racetrack, because you already know, you're already primed and you already know what to expect, right?
Yeah.
And so these kids that are coming up and racing now, I mean, they're just computer junkies, man. They're just spending
Mm,
hours upon hours of time doing iRacing because they have their
yeah.
setup with their steering wheel and their
Right.
pedal system and all that kind of stuff. And they're learning the tracks, and they're not wrecking cars because if they crash, all they do is hit the reset button. You know, when I was doing it, it was like, uh-oh, this is going to cost a lot of money. So I learned
I
from the
love
school of
it.
hard knocks.
Yeah,
But
I
what
love
about
it.
you? You talk about, and embrace technology, as it appears. Do you use it a lot as well in your profession?
Yeah, we use a lot of technology. I mean, and it's more and more every year. I mean, just the computers, the video. It used to be VHS and it went to beta. Now it's all digital. And then the analytics piece is the biggest part now, and just like score probability and things like that, and drive start analysis and like people are making decisions. Do you go for it on fourth down? Do you kick? Do you punt? I mean, all those types of things is all data driven now,
Wow.
and there's some coaches that embrace it, and there's some coaches that just want to do it by feel. Like
Uh-huh.
what you're talking about is kind of
Uh-huh.
just how we always done it, and there's no reason to change. I've won a lot of games doing it this way, and so, but a lot of the like in the NFL, like a lot of the owners, and that's what they want to see because a lot of the owners that come from a business background and whether it's hedge funds or whatever, and they're looking for data.
Hmm.
They want data, and so that kind of trickles down to the college level as well. But it seemed like you were certainly ahead of your time in that regard. But if you could take me to something struck me what you said earlier about you were 8 years old, you go to the track, and there's no one there that looks like you. So what was it like being one of the very few black African American NASCAR drivers, on that circuit? Like, what was that like for you?
It was very lonely, trust me on that. I mean, I'm
Mm,
telling you, since the 1960s, there have been only four black drivers to race at the top level of NASCAR, which is the Cup Series. There was Wendell Scott, who you might know from the movie Grease Lightning. What is the movie? God, what was this? All right, now I'm putting my foot in my mouth. It's not Grease Lightning. Um, I can't remember, but it was with Richard Pryor and Pam Grier,
mm,
and it was his story. And so there was a movie done on him,
mm,
and it was very successful. But he ran in the 60s and the early 70s. A guy by the name of Willie T. Ribbs ran in the 80s for a couple of races. I ran
mm,
a handful of races in the mid 2000s. And
mm.
then Bubba Wallace is now on the scene. So there's been
Yep.
only four of us in the 60
Wow.
years from 1960 to 2020 that have raced at the top level of NASCAR. Four. That's it. So I'm in a very exclusive club. And,
Sure.
it's clear that it was exclusive by just how I was received.
Yeah.
While I was respected in the garage area, fortunately,
Mm,
amongst my competitors,
mm,
a lot of the fans truly did not embrace me. I would be sometimes booed before driver introductions or during driver introductions before the race.
mm.
And, I can remember many a time where I was going from like the parking lot to the actual racetrack, walking amongst, some of these NASCAR, traditional fans,
Yeah.
and made them feel very uncomfortable. I've heard, the N-word muttered under breath. I've seen the conversation stop and the fingers
Mm,
pointed at me and stuff like that. And I'm like, I'm one guy out of a sea of them. So it's not as if I could do anything about it. But the good thing is that, despite that story I just told you, nobody
mm.
ran up to me and waved a Confederate flag in my face or, called me an N-word to my face. I've heard some
Sure.
stuff muttered, but, nobody has come and done that. So
Yeah.
to the fans, credit, there was nothing overt, but there was a whole
Mm.
lot of, subliminal stuff that was going on
Sure.
around there. But
Sure.
no, I mean, and I really didn't care about it. I knew it was there, and I just had to take it, put it out of my mind, compartmentalize, and realize I
Mm.
was there to do a job, to race
Yeah.
this car, this truck, as fast as I possibly could, and to, try to beat everybody who was out there. And, all those things that were issues were things that came along with the territory.
Sure.
But, I didn't let that spin me out. I didn't let them get the best of me. I realized that when they're waving their Confederate flags, that was something that was in their history, their Southern
Mm,
heritage, as I've been told. And I just kind of looked at it as, they were just fairly ignorant. They just didn't know any better as far as that was
mm,
concerned, because, that war is the history. Why are
mm,
we waving Confederate flags? We should all be, waving the American flag. And I
mm.
applaud NASCAR for having recently banned the Confederate flag from all of their events. And so that's a
Wow.
really big step. That was something that I talked about in the mid 2000s that I wasn't
Mm,
comfortable with, was the
mm.
Confederate flag. But, everything then kind of fell on deaf ears. NASCAR wasn't
Sure.
ready to change.
Mm-hmm.
NASCAR is now at a point with the unfortunate passing, George Floyd and Ahmaud
Yeah.
Arbery and Breonna Taylor. People are listening now. They're becoming more receptive.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, was the time for NASCAR to change. And Bubba Wallace, who basically challenged them to do so,
Mm-hmm.
convinced them that was the right thing to do. And they did that. And that was something I never thought I would see. I really didn't. Just like I never thought I would see Barack Obama be a president, and be our president. I
Right.
just never thought I would see, the banning of the Confederate flag. That was kind of
Yeah.
like, apple pie and Chevrolet to them.
Yeah.
So for
Sure.
that to happen, it was really a proud moment as far as I'm concerned. And, all the stuff that I had to endure just made it all that much easier for Bubba. and I'm glad of
Hmm.
that. Just like, those that came before me made it easier for me, I made
Sure.
it easier for him. And
Yeah.
it allowed him to open that door to
Hmm.
great change. And I'm just proud of him for what he's done.
Yeah, no doubt. Where'd you get your support from in terms, like when you were having these challenges, breaking into the series, coming on the scene, there's obviously, there's racism, there's undercurrents of it, there's no one looks like you. I mean, I know you got family, but in terms of whether sponsors, did you have crew chief? I mean, who were the people that were in your corner that were like, to say, "Hey, we got your back. Let's go do this," or did you feel like you were pretty much on your own?
I pretty much felt like I was on an island, but my real
Mm,
support structure is my family. My
mm,
mother and my father, my wife,
mm,
they help shoulder the load. And, I can't thank them enough for having done that, because there were some times where I just wanted to go postal and,
mm,
be an angry black man and have them, look at me and go, yeah, that's how they are, that sort of thing. But I've
mm,
always held myself with, high esteem and
mm,
professionalism, and, just looked at people as this is how they were brought up. With regard
mm,
to racism and stuff, that's not something that you're born with. That's something that's
mm,
learned, right?
mm,
I see that because, my teenage sons, when they were young, I saw how when they would play with their friends, they were all just playing. They didn't care about color. They were just having fun, right? And then as
right,
they got older, all of a sudden differences started to come out, right? And, some of their friends were like, that were white, were like, well, let me touch your hair, and, just all those things that
right.
all of a sudden become more um, prominent to their discovery. And
Mm-hmm,
then, of course, when they hear what goes on in their households, that's a
mm-hmm.
huge influence to them as well, right? So
Sure, sure.
um, I tried not to let some of
Mm,
that those feelings that they had and those beliefs that they have
mm,
derail me. I
sure.
couldn't let me beat me or let
Yeah,
them beat me. And I
yeah,
definitely didn't want to beat myself by
yeah,
letting that get into my head. It was all a
sure.
matter of, like I said before, that word compartmentalize. You got to
Mm-hmm,
compartmentalize. If you keep
yeah,
worrying about things that happened in the past or
right.
things that didn't work out for you, then all it's going to do is wear on you. That's going to eat at you. And you
Right.
can't go forward when you got that burden that you're continuing to shoulder. So,
Yeah.
I was there, like I said before, to do a job. I was very fortunate that I didn't take no for an answer, because
Mm,
believe me, I was discouraged almost every step of the way to try
mm,
and become a professional race car driver. It's like, you guys don't race. Why are you here? That sort of thing. I mean,
yeah.
I got to admit that from their perspective, I came out of nowhere, because
Mm,
the NASCAR environment was all basically, entrenched in the deep South, right?
yeah.
They
Mm-hmm,
all knew each other. They all grew up racing against each other, whether it be on
mm-hmm,
dirt and then through the feeder ranks, through the
yeah.
series. Here I am up in Northern California on the West Coast, right?
Mm,
As white collar as you want to be, and professional, conducting project meetings and with a dozen engineers and stuff like that.
yeah.
And then I show up out of nowhere effectively. It's kind of like Days of Thunder, where Tom Cruise rolls into the speedway to test a stock car on a motorcycle having a Indy car or open wheel background. And, when he comes up to the team, they're all looking at him like,
Yeah.
have you ever driven a stock car? And he's like, no. And, well, these things will probably bite you, and you don't need you probably trying to do this. And he's like,
Mm,
just let me do it. I was kind of the same way. I
yeah.
came out basically from nowhere. They didn't even know who I was. They never heard of me. Then I'm a black guy on top of that, and then I'm coming over here through the high end of NASCAR. I started out in the
Right.
truck series. Well, actually, my first race was in the Xfinity series, which is the car series. And then I went into the truck series, where I made most of the name for myself. And then I ran some cup races. But what I'm trying to say is there are three top national touring series in
Mm-hmm,
NASCAR: the truck series, the Xfinity
mm,
series, and the cup series. And I bypassed all the stepping stones to get to the top levels, right? Usually you go through like late models and K&Ns, and before that, Bandoleros and Legends cars. There's a whole um, ladder that you climb to get to the point where you're supposedly ready to race stock cars. I
mm.
bypassed all that. I had never even raced on an oval before I came to NASCAR. Never raced on an oval. All of my
That's a
racing was done on a road course, turning right, turning left, 3.5, 4 mile length tracks. My first test in a stock car, my very first test in a stock car, was on a 1/4 mile high bank short track, which is called a bull ring. with a figure-8 infield. When I mean by figure-8, they would run demolition derby stuff in there. And I was looking at this track like, y'all actually race here? So
That is fascinating to me. Like how, okay, this seems like a very like maybe a simple question. How were you able to come out of nowhere and basically bypass, all it's almost like me maybe coming out of the high school ranks and becoming, jumping right up in the Power Five. You
yeah,
know, how did you do that with all the obstacles in front of you as well?
you know, luck, hard work, determination, and a lot of natural driving ability. I mean, I'll
Mm,
tell you, I was never formally trained as a race car driver in my whole career. Even when I road raced, I was never formally trained. I never went to a racing school. I never went to a stock car school. I just learned, I watched people and I
yeah.
tried, and I just was a student of the sport. And I
Mm,
would go out and talk to people that were doing it. What are you doing here? What are you doing there? What can I do to improve? I was just a sponge and I kept trying to absorb everything I could. But at the end of the day, I was given a gift, Mel. I was just, a God-given gift. There are those that can race at 8/10, but very few that can race at 10/10. What I mean by 8/10 is that you can be good, but to be great, it's really very difficult because the margin of error becomes razor thin.
yeah.
And, there are a lot of guys that can go out there and do a good job, but to just go out there and become a professional, it's very, very difficult, because you are proactive. You are not reactive to what's going on out there. For the
Mm,
most part, kind of what's going to happen and how far you can push things before you push them over the edge. I mean, anybody can go out there and just put their foot to the floor and crash, but
sure.
that's not going to get you any longevity in racing. You will be out of there in a heartbeat. You have to know how to push to the edge without overstepping it. And that's something that's very hard to teach. It's something that's innate. It's a feel. It's a gift that you're given. It's,
Hmm.
seat of the pants feel. It's like, you're either given it or you're not. And so for me to transition from racing sports cars and long tracks, turning right and left, to getting into a bull ring or into an oval and just turning left and trying to stay off concrete walls and, racing inches from apart from each other at 200 miles an hour, it's just, I can't explain it. It was just, I was born to do it. I was, given a gift to do it.
Wow. What was the scariest moment that you can remember that you had on a track?
I'll tell you what, the scariest moment is a moment that I don't remember. And what I'm talking
Mm,
about is in 2004 at Texas Motor Speedway, I was in a wreck that took place at probably my impact with the wall was probably about 130, 140 miles an hour,
mm,
but I was knocked out. I was only suffered one concussion in my career, and that was it. I was going through the corner side by side with another competitor, and in the truck series, what happens is if you are too close to the other competitor, if you're just, too close to them, almost hitting each other, the truck on the outside can take the air off the spoiler of the truck on the inside. And my competitor took the air off the back end of my truck, which caused me to go loose. And so I overcorrected trying to catch the slide, and he and I both went into the wall. The good thing about all of that situation is that by that time, NASCAR had instituted safer walls or safer barriers, which are
mm,
basically walls that compress.
mm,
It's a buffer between you and the concrete wall, right?
mm,
Because if I hit the concrete wall, I very well may not be here right now.
mm.
And the person who, unfortunately I owe, these safety improvements to is Dale Earnhardt. I don't know if you know or heard of him, but
Yep.
he was, between him and Richard Petty, probably the two
Yep.
most famous NASCAR drivers
Hmm.
in NASCAR.
Yep.
And Dale Earnhardt lost his life in 2001 at Daytona, almost on the last lap of the race.
Hmm.
And he was not even going that fast, but he hit the wall at the wrong angle. And he suffered what's called a basilar head fracture, which means that he snapped his neck at the base of his skull because he
Mm,
hit it at just the right impact to do so. And his belts probably weren't that tight from what the reports said and the discovery and investigation indicated.
hmm.
But once NASCAR realized that if Dale Earnhardt, who was from all intents and purposes invincible, could lose
Yep.
his life, then we need to step up our safety protocols. And so as a result of that, they formed and created safer walls or safer barriers. And they also created something called the Hans device, which stands
Hmm.
for head and neck system. And that is basically a collar that goes around your neck and your shoulders that fastens to your helmet. Okay. And right there, it limits the amount of movement that your head can have so that you can't snap your neck, right? You
Mm.
can't break your neck. And so as a result of those two technological advances, they had those instituted at Texas Motor Speedway.
Mm.
And even though myself and my competitor went into the wall, neither one of us were seriously hurt. Now, I
Wow.
suffered a concussion, like I said, and had I not
Sure.
looked at the video of the race afterwards, I would have never believed that I was out, because the only thing I remember is being in the ambulance, wondering why I was in the ambulance going for a ride to the hospital. I was like, what am I doing here? Where's the race? You know, I'm like,
Right, right,
it
right.
was none the worse for wear, right? But I looked at the video of the crash, and I saw my truck come to a screeching stop, and just dragging parts and pieces. And I saw how I dropped the window net. I took off my helmet. I put on my racing cap. I crawled. I got out of the truck on my own, under my own power. I actually waved to the fans as I walked into the ambulance, and I don't remember any of that. So, again, I'm no worse for the wear.
Wow, that's incredible. You mentioned how NASCAR, how they progress with the safety, from the safety aspect.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that you were kind of surprised, or maybe you didn't think you would ever see NASCAR ban the Confederate flag. What do you think has attributed to that? Why do you think that happened? Is it NASCAR? Have they become more progressive? Is it a different leadership? Is it maybe something that the sponsors called for? What's your take on that?
Yeah, again, I think it's more that NASCAR was open to change. Their ears were open as a result of the unfortunate deaths that, has created a movement across this country. And
Hmm.
NASCAR, I think, just really sat up, took notice, and listened to Bubba, because Bubba Wallace was the one who said to NASCAR, we need to get rid of these flags. And I'll tell you, when I first saw racing on TV, when I was really young, like, 8 years old or whatever, and I watched ABC's Wide World of Sports, and I would watch the Daytona 500 and the Southern 500, from Darlington, and the Talladega 500. All I saw were these Confederate flags just
Yeah.
blowing in the breeze. And I
Yeah.
just looked at that stuff and I just shook my head like I'm doing right now. I was like,
Hmm.
why would anybody want to subject themselves to that environment,
Hmm.
who's not white? And sure enough, it was just nothing but a sea of white people in the stands. The crowd was all white, and
Sure.
that's what I would see on the broadcast. And when I saw the pit reporter talking to a driver, they didn't look like me. They sure didn't sound like me with their southern drawls and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, I just can't understand why anybody would want to run around in a circle at 200 miles an hour trying to stay off a concrete wall. And so who would have thought that I would wind up being a NASCAR? But no, getting back to to your question, the Confederate flag is a complete turnoff to making the sport more inclusive. And NASCAR realized that they needed to make the sport more inclusive. Their traditional Southern fan base is tapped out. I was fortunate enough to be racing in NASCAR in the mid 2000s, which is what the high tide of the sport. When I was racing, at the cup level, there were 120, 140, 150,000 people in the stands. I mean, that would be a typical, attendance number for a race there. Now, pre-COVID-19, NASCAR was taking stands out because they were happy, or lucky, I should say, if they could get 40, 45,000 people in the stands. It was dying on the vine because that
I didn't
traditional
realize
fan
that.
base, oh yeah, that traditional fan base was, aging out, and they were not able to capture the interest of the millennials.
Mm.
If the kids want to go to a race, then the parents, want to support the kid going to a race, and we all do a family project or,
Yeah.
outing, and we go to the races, right? But
Yep.
their kids were not interested. They were more interested in, tech, hand tech, smartphones, and all that kind of stuff, whatever it is they were doing. But they just had no appreciation for racing. And a lot of that is unfortunate, but as a result of the fact that with technology, These kids can't maintain their own cars anymore. They can't
Mm,
work on them, right? When I
mm,
was growing up, I did my own wrenching, right? I'm changing spark plugs, changing oil, changing radiators, changing water
mm,
pumps. Like I said, swapped out my suspension for racing suspension. I did all
yeah.
that myself. These
Mm,
kids can't hardly work on cars anymore because to maintain them, you got to plug them up to a computer for their diagnostic
mm,
test,
yeah,
and everything
sure.
is done basically that way. Sure,
Yeah.
you can do some things, but it's kids look at cars now as just a utility vehicle,
Mm,
as a tool. I mean,
mm,
that's how my kids look at it. My kids are in their teens and they have no appreciation for working on cars and they have no desire. It's not
mm,
interesting to them. And so NASCAR saw a huge gap in terms of what was going on with their fan base. And they realized that to continue to grow and be quote unquote America's sport, they had to make the sport welcoming and inclusive. And with
mm,
those flags blowing around, there was no way they were going to get anything other than their standard, typical, demographic. And
mm,
so they knew that as the numbers show, that majority is going to start eventually becoming the minority.
mm,
And they probably realize that as well. You got to, you look at the numbers,
mm,
and the statistics and, all the things that measure what's going on with regard to, the demographic of the country.
sure.
There's a whole lot more black and brown out there and what have
Mm,
you than there is just them. And so, they're looking at it from a long-term perspective. You know
yeah.
what? You darn right we need to make this sport inclusive. That's
Mm,
a great idea. Let's start with that flag. And as a result of that, there have been a lot of folks that have come on social media and talked
mm,
about like, hey, I'm going to take in a NASCAR race and such. And
yeah.
I'm thinking that's great because as the word gets out and they realize how much fun it is to be a part of the sport, not just
Yeah.
being a driver, but just to enjoy the sport. There's nothing like, 40 cars going by you at 200 miles an hour. It's
Right.
unbelievable.
Sure. Sure.
The feel of it, the rumble of
Yep.
it, it's just,
Yeah.
it'll blow your hat off. It's amazing. I've taken black families to NASCAR races
Mm,
only because I'm an insider and they know they're safe with me and I know what I'm
mm,
doing, where to go and where
sure.
not to go and all that kind of stuff. They said, Bill, that was a phenomenal experience. Next time, you want to go to, you're going to a NASCAR race, let me know. I want to go again and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It blew me away. I just didn't think that they would have so much fun. But
Yeah.
to a man, just about everybody who's experienced it has loved it. It was just a matter of it
Yeah.
being comfortable to them.
Yep, sure. I can vouch for that because when I coached in Jacksonville, I went to Daytona and it was like a dual race.
Uh-huh.
And I got the little headsets where you can tune
Yep.
into the different deal. I took one of my sons and the it's nothing like watching on TV.
No.
The sound, the speed, and the smell of the rubber, the fuel was
Mm-hmm.
incredible. I mean, it was like I'm saying to myself, I I like this. I mean, this was good. And I read Joe Gibbs's book, Racing to Win, years ago, and so I was intrigued by it. But you're right. When when Bubba Wallace spoke up, and then they decided to ban the Confederate flag. I went online. I ordered a Bubba Wallace T-shirt and a hat.
Cool.
And I signed up on the NASCAR on the ESPN deal. Signed up on the NASCAR site, and getting the updates and all that. And
Well, that's
and then I,
excellent.
I I was like, hey, I got to get we got to get Bill Lester on. But that's it. I guess it. So you're thinking it was more of a business move to grow the sport, or it
Yeah,
was
I,
it was
I
an
definitely
opportunity
believe.
to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely believe that was incentive to do it.
Hmm.
And the time was right. They could
Yeah.
justify doing it without
Yeah.
like alienating, everybody that was their core fan base.
Sure.
But they realized they could see it. Everybody could see what was going
Yeah.
on in terms of the number of spectators dwindling,
Hmm.
and grandstands that were put in to get more people back when I was racing were now
Hmm.
being taken out. And
Hmm.
those that weren't being taken out, they were being covered with sponsor banners, so it didn't look like nobody was there, and what
Sure.
have you. So
Sure.
yeah, for the growth and betterment of
Yeah.
the sport, they had to be inclusive. They had to make it a welcoming environment. It was a
Right.
business decision. I mean, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I believe that a number of those folks there, over in Daytona, believe that it was high time to get rid of that Confederate flag. But I don't think that unless what has happened recently has happened, they would
Yeah.
have done it. I'm not convinced they would have done it.
Sure. How do you think Bubba Wallace is handling everything? From the outside looking in, it seems like he's doing a heck of a job. It's a lot of pressure on him, and he's trying to compete and win. But
Yeah.
he's got these other pressures, daily. You're somewhat on the inside. How do you think that he's doing with all of this?
I think he's doing extremely well, but it's burning him out. And, he
Mm,
said as much. And,
yeah.
he and I, we know each other. We've talked on a number of occasions. And
Mm,
when he basically moved the Black Lives Matter movement car onto the
mm,
track at Martinsville, I just
mm,
told him, I said, man, that's great. I sent him a text and, told him that I was proud of him and that if there's anything I could do to help him or whatever, just let me know. And he got back to me and he told me how much he appreciated it. And, he's sincere. He'll reach out to me, but I don't
mm.
believe he feels he needs to. I think he has, just like I did, a very strong support system, family support
Right.
system.
Hmm.
And, his team is behind him. His crew is behind him. The NASCAR garage is behind him. And that was made evident, before the race at Talladega, when they pushed his car up to the
Yeah.
front of the
Yeah.
line. I
Yes.
mean, I was floored. I was like, are
Yeah.
you kidding me? I
Yeah.
mean, that
I
was a
know.
beautiful
I
thing.
know.
I just,
I know.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I think he's doing a tremendous job because I can tell you, Mel, since all of this has really occurred, I've done upwards of 25 interviews myself. I mean, CNN and Fox
Sure.
Sports and
Yeah.
NPR and, international, BBC. I've done
Yeah.
all sorts of stuff. You and I talking,
Yep.
it's been
Yep.
overwhelming. And I'm on the periphery. So I can only imagine what it's like. I mean, he's been doing like late night shows and
Yep.
I mean, just I'm overwhelmed. I can't even name them all because it's a mind meld. But
Yeah.
he's done a great job. He's handled himself really well, and I like to think that he's just done a really good job of growing into his skin and
Mm.
becoming the man that he has become.
Hmm.
I saw Bubba when he first came into the sport. When I was like I told you back in the mid 2000s, and he was pretty much a kid, right? Because this was like 15 years ago, whatever.
Right.
He's only 26 now, so I've seen him kind of like growing up in the sport and he had really no awareness of who he was or what was going on. He was just like
Yeah.
bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and and now I see what he's grown to become,
Hmm.
and I commend him. I think he's done a tremendous job of shouldering that burden because we didn't sign up for that as race car drivers. We absolutely didn't. We signed up
Hmm.
to race and to win and to hold your sponsor in the highest esteem and regard and represent them well, represent your sport well. That's what we signed up for, right? We didn't
Sure.
sign up for interview after interview after interview after interview. I'm kind of the same thing. We're putting spins
Right.
on it, of course, but it's a story that is way overdue
Yeah.
because this change is way overdue, and I'm
Yeah.
just so happy that I'm here witnessing it and seeing it because again, I just never thought I would.
What do you think NASCAR needs to do further, beyond banning the Confederate flag? What do you think the next steps can be or should be or will be, to make the sport more inclusive, to, connect more with, people of color to grow the sport?
Well, again, they have to bend. I believe they should bend over backwards, making the sport more welcoming to folks
Mm,
of color. I mean, I don't know what it is they should be doing, whether it's reaching out to black organizations or whatever the case
mm,
is, but they need to encourage us to come out there and experience it because now the door is open. It really
yeah.
wasn't open before. It was, but it wasn't because the
Yeah.
flag was there. Just as well as I am. We see flags, flowing in the green. Why would we come in and subject ourselves to that? That's like going to a football game and seeing the stars and bars flying all over the place. We wouldn't do that. You're not going to be
Yeah.
comfortable there, especially
Right.
when all of them are looking at us like we got two heads, right? So, we wouldn't subject ourselves to that. But they
Mm,
need to put some steps and measures in place to make
mm,
it a more welcoming environment. The Confederate flag was just the first step. But
sure.
what I really want to do is challenge corporate America. Why am I challenging corporate America and not binge challenging corporate America? Because motorsports runs on dollars. It
Mm,
requires big sponsorship. Most people don't realize that a annual sponsorship for a cup car like Bubba Wallace's is an 18 to $20 million proposition a year.
mm.
18
That's
to
big
$20
money.
million dollars.
That's big money.
And that is something that the drivers, by and large, typically have to bring with them. The team owners are just providing the infrastructure. They're providing the cars, the crew, the transporters, tractor trailers, the
Mm,
shop, but they are not really on the hook for providing the sponsorship because there are so many of them that come from wealth and privilege that they don't have to. And so that
mm,
is a huge disqualifier for us because we're not coming from that same wealth and privilege, and
Mm,
we are not gaining the same access to capital that they are. Those
mm,
decisions in the boardrooms and offices of the C-suite of corporate America are
mm,
mostly made by folks that don't look like you and me,
mm.
that are doing the same thing over and over. They're not
Wow.
going to take a chance on, typically bringing in something that might ruffle some feathers. Oh, a black driver, well, that might ruffle, our consumers. I'm like, really? We consume just as much as everybody else does, if not more in a lot of
Right,
cases.
right,
But
right,
they have this old mentality that most of these drivers are white and the fan base is all white. Well, yeah, the fan base has been white because you know how we do. If we don't see anybody that looks like us or sounds
right.
like us and is doing well, why are we there? If there's not a Bubba Wallace out there or somebody looks like me out there,
Mm.
it's 40 cars running around in a circle. When
Sure,
we can
sure.
identify with that person, that athlete, that individual, it makes
Mm.
it real, right? It's like what
Yep,
Tiger Woods did with golf, what
yep,
Venus and Serena Williams and Arthur Ashe did with tennis.
yep.
It's that sort of scenario. We get Bubba with the right money, the right access to capital, and a level playing field. Let's see what he can do. Because what most people don't realize is that he's not playing on a level playing field. He's racing with one hand effectively tied behind his back.
Mm,
That car, that team, that organization needs more sponsorship.
mm.
In corporate America just has not been forthcoming. When he had that car at Talladega that they pushed forward, it had on his fire suit Richard Petty Motorsports on it.
Mm.
The team, branding, not a
Right.
corporate sponsor.
That was it.
If you looked at the car, it had Victory Junction on it. That's a
Mm.
non-profit organization that was put on there because there's no real sponsorship on that car, that race. All these
Wow.
other cars got all that sponsorship on it. They got that 18
Yeah.
to 20 million. I think they were probably running at a fraction of what the sponsorship that's required is. And when I say required, I say it because you can't want for anything in this sport. Money buys speed. Money
Hmm.
buys you the best equipment. It buys you the
Yep.
best people. It provides you the best opportunities for success. It buys you
Yep.
the best, motors and, aerodynamics, wind tunnel time. All that stuff gets eaten up. You wonder where all that money goes? Believe me, transporting that traveling circus all across the country with all those people, that adds up real fast. But
Yep.
getting back to, the fact that the driver has to bring that sponsorship more often than not is
Mm.
crazy. Here's your analogy. It's like telling LeBron James, hey, LeBron, we want you to play for, the Lakers. We want you to play for us. But, you got to bring 18 to $20 million to be part of the team. I know what you can do. You can dribble. You got handles. You can jump over the gym. Where's your checkbook? That's what racing is. That's what professional racing is. I don't care if it's NASCAR, IndyCar, sports cars, drag racing. You got to have that checkbook. As a driver, for the most part, unless you're a household name. If you're a household name, you
Mm.
can get by. Jimmy Johnson's not bringing a checkbook.
Mm. Sure.
Um, some of the other guys out there aren't bringing checkbooks, but for the most part, man, if you're not, like I said, household name, then
Right.
you got to bring the helmet and the money.
How do you think NASCAR can get more African American drivers, in the game, more in the sport? Because of this, seems like there's some huge hurdles and financial implications. And again, there's not the representation that black kids can see.
Right.
Are there initiatives in the pipeline to get more black drivers in the sport?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, what NASCAR has relied upon in the past is what's called the Drive for Diversity, or D4D program.
Mm.
And, it's had some success. The fact is, Bubba Wallace is a product of the D4D program,
Mm.
but he's one of the very few. Very
Sure.
few. They had two other guys that had been successful from the D4D program.
Hmm.
Guy by the name of Daniel Suarez, who's Hispanic Latino, who is struggling for sponsorship. He's in a back marker team. He's got the same problem that Bubba's got, and it's a crying shame because you would think that being the only Hispanic Latino would bring some sponsors to the fore, but it's been woefully lacking. And the other guy, who was part of the D4D program, shot himself in the foot. You probably don't know who this guy is, but what's his name? Oh gosh, now I forgot his name. I'm on a blank. He went on and blew his opportunities by using the N-word on an iRacing type streamed racing program.
Mm.
And he just he couldn't have done anything worse. As a
Sure.
product of the Drive for Diversity program, using
Right.
the N-word like he did freely was a
Yeah.
complete and absolute faux pas. He just tripped all over himself. And
Sure.
so, he has been suspended from NASCAR. And if he wants to come back, then he's going to have to go through some protocols, sensitivity training, diversity training, that sort of thing. But I don't know if he'll ever come back. But
Yeah.
it's a shame I can't remember his name. I've almost stricken him from my memory. I was so horrified at what he did. But
Right. Right.
getting
Right.
back to your question, the key thing is that exposure. You got to
Hmm.
get that exposure at a very young age.
Hmm.
Just like you probably played football at a very young age, and I was,
Very young.
exactly. I was exposed to racing at a very young age, which
Yeah.
allowed me to pursue that, because if my father never took me to a race, I probably would have never become a race
Sure.
car driver.
That's right.
It would have been too late for me to think that was something that I could do,
Yeah.
but he set the hook. That race that I went to set the hook. And so that allowed me to always think that I could pursue it, that gave me the desire to pursue it. And
Yeah.
so what really needs to happen is we need to have some more grassroots efforts to
Mm-hmm.
get more exposure in the Black community,
Hmm.
Hispanic, Latino community, what have you,
Hmm.
to gain more exposure to the sport. That's what the
Yep.
key thing is. We
Yep.
really need to do that. And when you say, are there initiatives and stuff like that? The fact is, I'm working with a group of guys, 7 other guys, and we are trying to do just that. So
Mm.
we're not at a point where we're ready to launch, but we
Sure.
are working to provide that infrastructure so that we can gain or give that exposure and
Hmm.
set that hook with more of us so that we can look at it as something that we can aspire to do.
Right.
So that's
Well.
that's the answer to the question. We need to get them in early.
Yeah.
We need to groom them through the ranks so that when the opportunity, presents itself, we have people that are qualified that can do it. We have some young brothers and sisters that are ready to race.
Well, as we close, I understand that you're working on a memoir. You're writing
Yeah,
a book. And what
there's some truth to
is that
that.
true?
Yeah,
And
it's a
what was the inspiration behind that?
You know what? Whenever I've told my story, people say, wow, that's so motivational. I'm inspired to do it. You left
Yeah.
this great career at 37 to do something you didn't know if you were going to be successful at and, lived your dream. And yeah, I did it. I believed in
Yeah.
myself and I took chances. I got out of my comfort zone and all that sort of thing. And I made it happen. And just people just told me, by and large, that they were just inspired and motivated. And I was like, you
Yeah.
know what? If I didn't tell my story, that would be on me. That would be a shame. That'd be a tragedy. This is a story that can help people. This can motivate them. I have basically identified 8 keys, 8 traits that made me successful, allowed me to
Hmm.
pursue my dream. And
Hmm.
I identify those and I work on helping to explain these things to folks through my racing backdrop, through the things that I experienced in racing that I applied these techniques and skills towards that
Hmm.
allowed me to, at the end of the day, live my dream to become a professional race car driver. And the title of the memoir coming out in February of next year, right at Black History Month and right before the Daytona 500, is called Winning in Reverse. And it's called that because, as I explained to you earlier, I did everything backwards. I lived my life in reverse. I didn't get the go-kart early. I
Yep.
didn't start out, at a young age. I started out late. I went straight to full-size cars. And the crazy thing about my story is I never raced go-karts competitively until my last racing that I did in 2012. I raced go-karts for Team USA in international karting competition, believe it or not, in Portimao,
Wow.
Portugal. I was able to bring my whole family and everything, and I got to race in the Masters class, which is 36 years and up. I'm 50 years old already, so I'm already at a disadvantage. I don't have years of karting experience, but I made it through the ranks of qualifications here in the States to become a representative of Team USA, and I raced go-karts in Europe.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna be the first one to buy that book for sure. It's just you have a fascinating story, and I'm inspired, and it's very motivating. And as we close, I usually do a word of the week once a week, and so Bill, I'll ask you if there was one word that you could leave our country tonight. One word. What do you think that word would be?
That would what? Describe our country right now?
Or just one word that you like. You throw out a word like inspiration or humility, or what would that one word be for you that you would want to leave like for our country this evening, if you could?
Well, I mean, if I was to characterize it, I would just say disarray. And
Mm,
I would wish that it was a more uplifting message, but I
mm,
just see what's going on and we're in disarray. And
mm.
I hope we get back on track. I'm
Yeah.
hopeful that that will take place. But unfortunately, disarray is the word that I would use.
Hey, I feel you on that, man. I really appreciate you investing this time with us. I know you're busy, and I think this is your first IG live,
Yeah, man.
and so
Listen,
now you're in now. You know what I mean?
this is my baptism by fire. And I appreciate
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
man. I'm glad I was finally able to connect with you after not having done so initially, but we got it in. And I've
yeah,
enjoyed the conversation as well, Mel.
yeah. I enjoyed it, man, and we'll do it again one day. And let's stay in touch, man. I really appreciate you.
Absolutely, man. Maybe we can do it at the launch of the book.
We'll do it then. That's a
Sounds
bet.
good. You got a bet.
Okay, buddy. We'll see you, man. Take care.
All right, brother. Talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, Bill. We'll see you.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Man, that was very inspiring to listen to Bill like that, and just to him to tell his story. And he's just very authentic, very straightforward. He didn't pull any punches, and it was just a very educational for me. I hope you enjoyed it. I really did, and I'm looking forward to his book, and then seeing what NASCAR has in their future, and Bubba Wallace and the entire sport, and seeing if in fact the sport does grow. And so I just think it's very interesting, and I appreciate you guys hanging out with me tonight, and hopefully we'll see you again next week. And remember, be safe, be nice to each other, and go green, baby.